Hello, thanks again for joining. My name's Emily, and we're reading The Marrow Thieves by Sherry Dimmoline. So, last chapter we read about our main character Frenchie getting to know his group a little bit better, starting to learn some of the language that he'd been missing. And so this week we're reading the chapter Haunted in the Bush, and we're going to see some more of our characters a little bit deeper and as they go a little bit deeper into their journey as well. So I'll just get started. So, Haunted in the Bush. For a week, I'd had trouble sleeping. I wanted to see Mitch and my parents when I closed my eyes, but not in the way they had been coming to me as of late. Mom showing up in my tent with her mouth sewn shut and her left arm missing. Dad sitting by the fire drinking out of a mason jar, then jumping into the flames when I got close enough to smell the moose hide of his mitts. I spent a lot of time with Riri, and she took full advantage of my resistance to sleep. Where did you walk from? The outer city. Did the recruiters chase you? They would have. My brother stopped them. Did your brother get taken? Yeah, Ree. He got taken. What did he look like? He seemed really big, but I don't think he was. I think maybe he was just always bigger than me. He had eyes that were blue sometimes, but sometimes looked gray, and his hair was almost black. His teeth were crooked so that the front ones looked like they were holding hands. It was painful, but I didn't really mind. The more I described my brother, my parents, our makeshift community before Dad left with the council, the more I remembered, like the way my uncle jigged to heavy metal. Instead of dreaming their tragic forms, I recreated them as living, laughing people in the cool red confines of Riri's tent as she drifted off. I woke up with stiff muscles and frozen toes on her tarp one morning, her small form huddled under layers, cheeks pink with warmth and rest. I must have fallen asleep in the middle of talking the night before. I could see my breath and hear the near constant rain pattering on the vinyl walls. A slow, steady drizzle. That's the best we could hope for these days. Meg couldn't explain the science of it, but ever since the north started melting, there were more rains. I took the damp out of my legs and laced my boots back on, wrapping the tops in strips of fabric that tore as I knotted them. Almost time to replace them. Thank God I was done with the last growth spurt. I'd ended up having to wear flip-flops for weeks. They were the only thing that fit until we scavenged a forgotten fishing lodge and found the boots I wore now. Outside, Wab and Cheeboy were already packing up her tent. She moved away from him when I came out, and he shuffled off to fold his own tent, leaving her to wind the rope and store her pegs. Something about their movements, choppy and stilted, made me feel awkward. I tried to fill the space with words. Good morning. Hey, Wab, start breakfast yet? Twins are on meal duty. They're homesteaders. Oh, right, I forgot it was hunting day. Yippee, more squirrel and mushroom stew. She didn't answer. Instead, she gave me a wry look, then started braiding up her hair as she watched Cheap Boy work. Not that I don't like your stew, it's just... Thankfully, I was interrupted when Slopper farted loud and long from his tent. We couldn't help but laugh. Christ, sounds like that one ripped a hole in the ground, one of the twins shouted from the main latrine behind a dense thicket. Chuckles could be heard from Miggs and Minerva's tents. Gross. Ree was up. With that introduction to the new day, the camp came to life, one by one, brushing their teeth with brushes worn to stiff nubs, beating the wet out of clothes by slapping them against trunks, and running tight circles around the perimeter to warm up. We sat in a quiet circle, packing our gear and waiting for food. The hunters strapped on the wristwatches we shared. Mick didn't need one. He kept a pocket watch in his jeans. It was important for hunters to keep time, so we could keep track of each other and the day. We never used to need these things, Meg commented as we wound the mechanisms and checked that they were synchronized. But no one has the skill of telling time by the sky here. Maybe one day we'll run into someone who does. Then we won't have to rely on these things no more. The twins opened a few tins of condensed milk, handing the empty cans to Minerva, who rinsed them out in a puddle. She smiled when she cleaned the lids and pulled them off, stashing them in the leather crossbody bag she wore every day. Who knew what she was up to? Minerva collected odd things. We didn't even question it anymore. Meg crushed the tins as small as they could go so we could bury them along with our other minimal garbage by the latrine. After a hasty breakfast of mush, the hunters were off, eager to take advantage of the halt in the rain and the appearance of sliced sunlight through the striated clouds. It's often necessary to break up a larger group to achieve a goal, especially since a lone shadow can get in more spots without notice than a larger group. We were 50-minute hike from the camp. I want you all to get used to the idea of operating alone. Mick was crouched down in the middle of our huddle, checking the ground for fresh prints. There's signs of deer in the area here. Maybe something bigger. If we work separately but together, we should bring back a nice buck. Woo-hoo! Slopper pumped his fist in the air, being a huge fan of fresh deer meat. But only, continued Meg, looking at the excited boy, if we can stay quiet and focused. Slopper lowered his fist and shuffled his feet. Meg stood, put his hand on his lower back, and stretched. We are going to each go our separate ways, so make sure you keep track of which direction you walk. Cross twigs on the path when you change directions to find your way back without tipping off potential predators. And have your weapons ready. Cheeboy and Wab were carrying bows. Slopper, not having graduated to full hunter status, carried a sharpened stick. Mig had his .45, and I had the rifle slung over my shoulder. Cheeboy used to carry the rifle, but he and Wab had been spending time relearning how bow hunting, so it fell to me now. Bows are sustainable. Eventually we won't be able to get more bullets, but at least I can make arrows, he'd explained. I think they just liked having this thing they shared in common, never mind all the hours it provided them alone to practice. Everyone goes a different way. Keep a steady but mindful pace, the same speed we keep on the trail when we move camp. An hour's walk, no more, and then you find a lookout and wait. Mick reloaded his handgun and tucked it back into his waistband. With his long raincoat with the popped-up collar and the .45 in his wide leather belt, he looked like an old-timey gunslinger. We wait for 2 hours, then make your way back here. If there's a problem, you all know the alarm. Cheeboy? Cheeboy threw his head back and let out a screech that curved up into a tail before fading. An eagle. Okay? We all nodded, then turned and pushed off into the bush like swimmers from the block. I walked southeast, careful to pace my steps so that I was moving neither too fast nor too slow to keep the ground synchronicity that would make it easier to track anyone who didn't return on time. Just in case. Our lives were a series of actions twinned with just-in-case reactions. The ground was cold and soggy. I could feel it through my boots. The earth barely had a chance to absorb the rainwater before the next deluge. It hadn't been this bad, even when I was on the move with my parents and brothers. Every year the world was making us more aware of change. After the cities crumbled off the coastlines, after the hurricanes and earthquakes made us fear for a solid ground to stand on. Even now, we were waiting for the planet to settle so we could figure out the ways in which we would be safe. But for now, there was just movement, especially for us, the hunted, trying to hunt. I concentrated on my gait, marking the changes in direction, following nothing but the way my feet seemed to divine. I made up goals as I walked to pass the time. If I avoided snapping even one twig in the next 5 minutes, it meant I would stop 10 minutes early. If I could remember the names of Mom's 3 favorite books, I would rest for 3 minutes. Even if I did manage to stay quiet, even if I did remember the books, I still walked on. At 59 minutes, 32 seconds, I stopped. I pulled my lighter, hunt bag, and the rifle off my back and settled into a nook made by a felled tree. I pushed up into the guts of its roots where they had been yanked out of the ground. The hole it left had filled with filthy water, but the roots were dry and tangled enough to make a comfortable seat. I climbed up into the middle of the roots and leaned back. It was kind of soothing like that, like a dozen wooden knuckles massaging my back. I leaned my head into the mess, limbs dangling with no effort just another set of roots protruding out of a fallen tree. I exhaled and paid attention to the way my lungs sank in, with just a little bit of rattle at the end left over from my annual bronchitis. My mind wandered. I tried to keep it focused on my surroundings, but I was tired, and so I let it run off a bit off leash for lack of the energy to remain disciplined. From where we were now running, looking at reality from this one point in time, it seemed as though the world had suddenly gone mad, poisoning your own drinking water, changing the air so much the earth shook and melted and crumbled, harvesting a race for medicine. How? How could this happen? Were they that much different from us? Would we be like them if we'd had a choice? Were they like us enough to let us live? I thought about the sickness and the insanity that crept like bedbugs through families while they slept. What would I have done to save my parents or Mitch, given the chance? Would I have been able to trap a child, to do what cut them into pieces, to boil them alive? I shuddered. I didn't want to know what they did, and I didn't really want to know if I'd be capable of doing it. Time passed. I may have fallen asleep once or twice. The world out here was quiet, like the land was holding its breath. But if you listened, really put conscious action into listening, things began to sing. Insects with wings pirouetted somewhere above my prone head. From the hole where the tree had once held onto the earth came the sound of deep movement, maybe just the mud shifting, and a group of small birds chatted with some clipped formality in the pines on the other side of the clearing. And then there were footsteps. I lifted my head, flexing my arm to raise the rifle into position. Soft shuffling over by the pines, I aimed the gun, watching the trees, praying for nothing more than a deer, nothing human, really. It was huge, like a tree had yanked itself up and was slowly moving into the clearing. A tree with bone, white branches. It walked further into the grass. A moose. I'd never seen one this close. Adrenaline made my teeth chatter. Time is slow in that vacuum space. In this new space, I had time to squarely between the moose's eye, watching his muscles contort and his skin wrinkle as he bent to take another mouthful of grass. Then I decided against it, lowering the barrel to his chest. Always go for the sure target. Meg had taught us that at one of my first hunts, and I listened to my elders. Just then he raised his head, so massive, I wondered at the blood it must take to animate, and he saw me. He blinked a long, slow blink, and faltered for 1 second or two before he began chewing again. He turned a bit so that I knew he was there. I swallowed hard, aiming, fingers exact and stiff. He was so friggin' big. It was like he was 100 years old, like he had watched all of this happen. Imagine being here through it all. The wars, the sickness, the earthquakes, the schools, only to come to this. He exhaled long and loud like the wind. This was food for a week. Hide and sinew to stitch together for tarps, blankets, ponchos. This was bone for pegs and chisels. This was me, the conquering hero, marching into camp with more meat than all of us could carry, taking the others back to field dress, this gift. This was Rose looking at me with those big eyes, so dark they shone burgundy in the firelight. This was my chance. But could we travel with this meat before it rotted? No. Could we smoke and dry it? No. Meg wouldn't set up camp for that long, especially not with a steady thread of smoke reaching above the trees, blasting a signal to anyone who might be out there. So we'd be leaving half, at least half, behind to rot. The moose watched all this play out on my face, a dirty boy tangled in the roots of an unpended tree, hiding from the world, hiding from memories of a family and days without pursuit. And he stayed perfectly still. His eyes were huge, dark globes that reflected back their surroundings. I was sure I could see myself in there, in the trees, a long-haired warrior taking aim. I lowered the rifle. He blinked once more and crossed his leg one over the other as if the start of a curtsy, then turned back into the trees. I couldn't do it. I couldn't let it come to this, not for him and not for me. Walking back to the meeting point, I swung between with my decision and wrenching regret. I was empty-handed, but something in my chest was burning a little brighter. I was okay with my decision, but not okay with the consequences. I secretly hoped no one else had gotten anything, so I wouldn't be the only loser, even if it meant we went hungry for a day. I pictured Riri's face, sad because of an empty belly. That made me ashamed. As it turned out, I didn't have to worry about Riri. When I made it to the meeting spot, Cheeboy and Mig were already there, each with a wild turkey strung up in a lower branch of a maple. Grabbed mine in the first 20 minutes. The rest must have been scared off by the shot and headed towards Cheeboy there. He grabbed one too. Mig was laughing, enjoying a hand-rolled smoke. Slopper was napping, leaning against a log. No luck, French? Watching them pat each other on the back and proudly spin their turkeys, examining the carcasses for size and weight, I was back to wrenching regret. Nope, nothing. Cheeboy glanced at his watch. 10 past. She'll be here. Mig scanned the area. She's good. Mig told the story of his turkey and rolled a new smoke to replace the one he'd finished. Slopper was awake now, yanking out a few of the nicer feathers from Cheeboy's bird. Cheeboy didn't protest. He was pacing the perimeter, looking at his watch. 25 after. Boy, give her another 10 and then we'll start her off in her direction. Mig was sympathetic, but short. She's fine. Better out here than most of us. We'd almost hit the 10-minute deadline when Wab silently slipped in beside us. Cheeboy sighed and even smiled. But he had made no movement towards her. She was empty-handed, which was weird for her, not that it bothered me. Misery loves company, I suppose. Everything okay? Meg's forehead wrinkled at her expression. She nodded. Let's head back. Without another word, she led the way back to camp. She didn't tell us what she'd seen out there until it slipped out a week later. All right, so that's the end of our chapter. So thanks again for joining. Again, we're reading The Marrow Thieves by Sherry Dimmoline. So every Wednesday we'll have another update, another chapter as we go through. All right, thanks.